We're going where you want to go so you can be where you need to be. It's Road Gang Radio with Lindsay, Lawler, and Jimmy Mack on RadioNemo.com.
I love that music. Totally gets me nodding.
Yeah. Road Gang Radio. You know, Lindsay, I was thinking about this too. Somebody was once criticizing millennials on the show many years ago, and I said,
Once?
Yeah,
Once?
Yeah, I know. All those extras and all those those boomer. And I don't mean the ones that are Sooners. I just mean the ones who.
Thank you for clarifying.
I had to clarify that. I always remind people that a whole bunch of millennials crossed the Tigris and Euphrates and pushed ISIS back to where they came from as well. By the way, our next guest has covered finance, tech, real estate, and culture. Is it you? I thought it was me. Why do I always do that?
I don't know, but today we're kicking things off with a conversation. This conversation might get you nodding, it might get you debating, or it might even get you yelling at your radio a little bit. I'm looking at you, Marshall Platter. Just kidding.
Turn it off.
Joining us is Charlie Wells. He's an award-winning reporter at Bloomberg News. He's a former Wall Street Journal and economist journalist, and he's a regular face on Bloomberg TV, BBC, Fox Business, and more. He's covered everything, guys, from finance and real estate to tech and culture, and now he's taking on the biggest cultural punching bag in the last 20 years. Millennials. So his new book is called What Happened to Millennials in Defense of a Generation. Guys, let's be real. I'm looking at you, Dre. Depending on who you are, you're either rolling your eyes at the subtitle of this book or you're leaning in, you're ready to fist pump. Either way, Charlie argues that millennials, now in their late 20s to early 40s, crazy, have been labeled lazy, entitled, avocado toast obsessed, you name it. But in reality, guys, they've lived through war, recession, a pandemic, polarization, and still found ways to innovate, adapt, and push culture forward. At least that's what Charlie says. We'll see if we agree or not. All right, here's the question. Jim, are millennials a broken generation still living in their parents' basements? Or are they about to run the country, run the companies, and even maybe heal some divides? Let's get into it. Please make welcome to the show our new friend, Charlie Wells. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Where are you this morning?
I'm in New York City, Big Apple.
Okay, big day it's a powerful day to be there, of course.
Ooh, for sure. Yeah, it's surreal always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that's interesting too, because given the scope of what a generation is the fact that there are many millennials who have very limited memory of the day that is being memorialized today, and there are many millennials who made a decision to actually enlist and become a participant in the global war on terror because of that. And I know you were listening to the top. I point out all the time that people shouldn't be too hard on millennials if they think they're a lazy generation. Many of them actually helped push ISIS, out of Iraq. Many of them actually were the first in Afghanistan and all of that kind of stuff. And I just kind of
very young ages, right? At incredibly young ages, at the beginnings of their careers.
Yeah, I mean it is, and like I said, there are people I know who literally I'm not kidding. I was at the University of Washington and found out that a young man who was a Russian immigrant, newly minted U.S. citizen, who actually signed up and went and fought.
Wow.
Went and fought. This is a generation that has gone through a lot of tumultuous moments. Can you kind of talk about why it is you decided to actually enter into this conversation? Because this book has not yet been written until you kind of get to it. A lot of people talk about this generation, but this is, I think, in many ways, the first real attempt to kind of make sense of it. Why now?
Well, it's risky territory, as you say, because this is a subject that, can kind of make people angry or it can make people proud. But basically, I am a personal finance reporter. So I write about how people are saving, spending, investing their money. And one of the best parts of my job is I get to call people every day across the country and talk to them. I think kind of similar to what you guys get to do, right? Where you get to talk to strangers. That's kind of my favorite thing. And I am a millennial, if you couldn't tell. I feel like you guys probably put two and two together. But I was picking up on some changes over time, right? Because there is this story about millennials as kind of failures to launch, as we weren't very loyal to our jobs, we weren't working very hard. But over the years, as I was kind of writing about people, I was picking up on, they're buying the house, they're buying the car, they're having the wedding, they're having the kids. And when you add all that together, they're adults, right? And I think one of the unfair associations, I think, in my honest opinion, is people had accused our generation of kind of, not growing up. And so I wanted to take a moment to say, hey, look, the oldest millennials have now been legally adults since 1999, right? That's like over 25 years. That's a quarter century. And a lot has happened in that period of time. As we were just talking about, people going abroad to fight in the war on terror, people dealing with the recession, looking for jobs. And this is the one statistic that sticks out to me with the millennial generation, because at one point, at the height of the recession, 1 out of 5 young people who wanted a job couldn't get one. So if you wanted to work, 1 in 5 of you in that young generation couldn't. And that was in 2009 in the recession. And that was this other thing that really influenced some of the difficult times that we had going into working life.
I'm genuinely curious. I'm gonna play devil's advocate with you a little bit here, just to poke the bear. Of course, I know you get this, but I'm 46. I was born in '78, so I'm in that weird gap that I'm not a millennial, but most of my friends are. But most of my friends are, so I'm like kind of in between. But yeah, anyway. But where I want to start is because you being a millennial yourself. Are they actually rising or are they just getting older and we can't ignore them anymore? I mean that with love, but it's real, like,
no, that's fair.
You know what I mean?
That's totally fair. And you know what? I think I see your point. And I think one of the things I try to do in this book is like take some of the heat out of these intergenerational divides, right? And my point is, when you're born, and just kind of what you're saying, like you're kind of a quote unquote cusp, right? You're kind of in between generations. And one of the things I try to bring out in the book, based on some research that's out there, is that, the year you're born matters, but so do a lot of other things, right? It's the history of the whole planet, that as we're all sitting on this rock going around the sun, like we're all witnessing these same things, right? So we have to take into account history. And the other element that we really need to think about is just stage of life, right? Like every human throughout time, since, the beginning, has gone through being born, getting older, growing up, and going through these things. So you've got to kind of take into all these things. And there are these quote unquote boundaries between generations. So the definition that a lot of places use is like someone who's born 1981 through 1996. I think we can be a little bit more fuzzy there, right? Because if you take into account history, if you take into account, life stage, and also the fact that some people are just kind of like old souls, right? Or they're young souls, right? They're just different. So I think the point of this book was to take some of the heat out of it. But to get back to your question, and I think good on you for playing devil's advocate here, because it does speak to this other thing. Millennials are now the largest living generation in America. There are 72 million of us. We crossed that point into being the largest living generation in 2019. So it's been a while, and we are kind of just here. Like we're kind of around. And so like I hate to sound like the big one in the room, but I am a part of this big generation. Like people kind of need to start getting used to it, right? The vice president's a millennial, right? There's a lot of the head of Facebook is a millennial. The head of OpenAI is a millennial. Like these people are taking power. So you kind of, they're not completely settled. We're in this kind of transition phase. And I wanted to kind of take a minute, pause, look at what we've done. What does that say about us? And take on some of those old stories that I think they're just out of date now.
It's interesting, too, by the way, because I think, and I wanted to kind of throw this stuff at you, and I want to remind people of something, too, that the 90s, despite the Oklahoma City bombing and, the stuff that always happens in every generation, the 90s really were kind of a boom, boom wonder time. They really were. Anybody who grew up in them, I had friends of mine who walked into buildings to drop something off and got offered a job on the spot. That was kind of the reality of what the 90s were. I'm not just making that up. And then suddenly we get to the aughts when these people are coming of age and we get 9/11. We get a collapse of a major American city while everybody kind of stands there hopelessly and helplessly and can't do anything about it. We get the greatest economic disaster in the country's history since the Great Depression. And we don't have, as with the Great Depression, Great Generation, a kind of galvanizing event like Pearl Harbor to snap people out of it. And you talk about this throughout the book, is that the economic disaster of the Great Recession and the shedding of jobs that went on there created this sort of atmosphere that occasionally kind of permeates a sense of helplessness. But the other thing is, too, is the fact that it's the rise of what we call the very online that I think in many ways give a really bad rap to millennials. Because I've always said, if you want to know the worst of a generation, just go to X anytime you want to, and you get a real sense of that. And I think a lot of people's vision of who you guys are is skewered by what they see represented on certain media platforms. I mean, it's like been the worst PR job of all time.
Right.
And so and you kind of do this in the book. You look at individual human beings, like Miju is a great example of somebody you look at. But can you talk a little bit about, like, is this a PR disaster in many ways that has created the negative sort of impact?
You're totally right. Yes, you're totally right. I mean, this is, I think, what happened, right? So right when millennials were in this really, really awkward phase of starting jobs, I think, everyone throughout time, remembers starting their first job. We're really awkward. We don't really know what we're doing. We don't understand, we don't have the wisdom that comes with just dealing with stuff. I remember being crazy at work, right? You watch TV, you think that that's how it works, whatever. But one of the things that collided with millennials coming out of the recession, so having a hard time finding a job, not having a lot of experience with jobs, right? Because there was that employment rate that was so high. It was just hard to get one, even if you really, really, really wanted one. That collided with social media. So there were a lot of, posts that maybe were a little bit embarrassing for us. So us writing stuff out there that doesn't look great. But then also, do you guys remember BuzzFeed? Do you remember Mashable? Do you remember all these websites that they kind of fed off the social media rise? And so we were really under this microscope of people kind of writing about us, this huge group of people at a time that I think is really awkward, where people make a lot of mistakes, whatever generation they're in. So yes, I would actually 100% agree. PR disaster. I think, we're coming out of that now. And I think we were talking about politics as well. And I think something that really struck me with this book is, you hear about politics online. We're talking about people who are quote unquote very online. In everyday life, in the people that I spoke to, they're not every choice they make goes back to who they voted for once every 4 years, right? That was a theme that really stuck out to me. And I found that actually pretty optimistic.
It's interesting, especially, but gosh, you just saying when you put it into perspective, hey, the vice president's a millennial, the Facebook founder, but when you put it in those kind of perspectives, it's like, oh shoot, yeah, you want to hate on somebody or these people that literally keep your life going. But it's interesting. I kind of broken them up into some archetypes I want to run by you in a minute. But before that, the idea here that it's like Gen Z kind of has the spotlight right now. Gen X is still sort of in power, debatably, but millennials are at the doorstep of leadership here. So how do you think, as a sort of a general narrative, that they will run things differently, even though we're already seeing it, but on the ultimate stage, how would millennials run things differently than, say, Gen X?
So I think that one of the big themes that we kind of were told as we were entering the workforce, kind of post-recession, is this idea of change, right? A president had it as a campaign slogan, right? And I think that tapped into this idea that kind of like after 9/11, after the war on terror, after the recession, everything kind of had changed and or had to change. And I think that has made millennials pretty adaptable, pretty ready for the unexpected, to basically say, hey, look, we were talking about that the 1990s, right? How that was a pretty stable time. There was this sense that, the Berlin Wall had fallen down. We'd beat communism. It was so optimistic. It felt like, we had won, we were on top. And then 9/11 happens and everything changes. And so I think that there's this, from a formative period in the lives of these people who are now, in their late 30s to their mid 40s, I think there's this idea of change. And I think that you'll see that in leadership. Now, what I would say to that, though, and this is something that I explore in this book, is change always good, right? I think that sometimes there's, I hear from a lot of like CEOs. I write about finance, personal finance, and I will often hear this idea of like disruption. We got to disrupt everything. Everything's got to change. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think that's something that with this millennial generation, we should be asking ourselves.
It's an American thing. And this is what's interesting, too.
This is great. Everything's perfect. We change it all.
Well, listen, though, this is really cool because, what Charlie does in the book, and I want to point this out to people, is he goes straight back to de Tocqueville in his famous book of Democracy in America. Lindsay, this is a quote from a book that was written in the 19th century about America from an outside observer from France. Here's the quote that Charlie uses. In the United States, a man carefully builds a dwelling in which to pass his declining years, and he sells it while the roof is being laid. He plants a garden and he rents it out just as he was going to taste its fruits. He clears a field and leaves to others the care of harvesting his crops. He embraces a profession and quits it. If I had told you that was about millennials or the American experience, you'd have been like, absolutely. I mean, they're just part of a great American thing of everybody who gets older complains about how they got cut out of the deal and the next generation got to power too early. And it doesn't help, by the way, Lindsay, that literally millennials come after possibly the most embittered generation of all time. Right in between boomers and millennials, there sit the people who never really got a chance to exercise any power and feel they got cut out by Oh my God! Name the name the president who's Generation X. Name the Generation X president. Because it ain't Jen Jones Obama. He's a boomer. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? What I'm telling you is you also have the bad luck of being up against the Xers, who are just the most bitter pills on the planet. Just saying, doesn't help. Doesn't help. There you go. Your thoughts, Mr. Wells.
Yeah, you know what? How do I follow that? You really said that. Well, going back to that de Tocqueville thing, right? That is this literal French aristocrat. Like when the U.S. in the 1800s was kind of starting to rise, starting to boom, people wanted to know what we were doing. They were like, "What is going on over there? Things are happening. Cities are coming up really fast. Like, how are they doing that?" It was sort of like how we might look to like India or China or something. Like we're kind of not super happy about it, but we want to know what's going on. And this guy comes over. He literally like sees us, and it's that idea of change that we just constantly want to keep moving. We'll do stuff. We want to innovate. We want to iterate. And there's something really, really liberating about that, right? And I think it is really cool that we come from a culture where it's actually okay to change. It's a big value that we have, and it's like, yeah, you wanna be like that. Okay, you go do it. Go off. And I know that you guys. Like you speak to a lot of drivers out there, and I think that is one of the coolest things in my view of moving around the country, right? You see so much change wherever you go, and it's like it's rare to have that kind of freedom. I know it's a hard job, but just going around seeing stuff, and that's in a lot of ways what that French aristocrat over 100 years ago was talking about.
Well, actually, to your point of the drive with truck drivers being that they've been everywhere, man, and seen so much across the country, this kind of plays into what I want to talk to you about, kind of regional millennial angles, because we can't just blanket statement millennials. We've all grown up in different, economic, geographic, all kinds of different things here. So, with that being said, we've got, as I said, the Rust Belt millennials, you've got urban millennials, rural millennials, southern millennials, coastal millennials. Like they're all such different things we've seen. Is there one thing you would say that is sort of the one characteristic, so to speak, all millennials have, even though they come from different places?
Yeah, I would say this idea of being a bridge. I think that's just something that came up a lot in conversations, which was, at a really pivotal moment, kind of when the oldest were hitting 18, when a lot of others were kind of in their teens or what have you. The internet was rising. 9/11 marked a pivot point, and there was just a lot of kind of before-after stories that these people have. They remember life before smartphones. They remember life before we were online all the time. And I know other generations had that too, but I think that this is kind of, it just kind of fell at a really formative period for millennials. And now millennials themselves are starting to have kids, right? Some millennials I know have kids in their 20s, literally. And so they are kind of passing on the knowledge that they kind of accumulated over time. And trying to remind people, young people who don't remember life before the iPhone, who don't remember life before you had to go through like 800 million security checks at an airport, who don't remember, life before apps, that look, there was a different era when we could actually kind of just be alone with each other, and that was okay. And maybe we want to think about that. And that was something to me that really stuck out, that this is going to sound weird, but as a kid, I remember before we had, that plug-in phone line internet, I was bored a lot. And actually that was really good, because when you're bored, when you're alone, just sitting there thinking, you really get to know who you are. And you really you can kind of not meditate or whatever, but you just kind of marinate, I would say, on a lot. And I think it's really helpful. And I think that's what a lot of these parents that I spoke with said they want to help their kids do.
Have you ever, guys, have you ever heard the comedian Des Bishop, who actually comes from my generation? He's got the funniest routine about mindfulness. He says, look, I mean, he said, I believe in mindfulness. I understand it. I know people should practice it. He said, but you have to remember, I come from a generation where you didn't practice mindfulness. You had to live it. If the bus wasn't there, there was nothing you could do to make the bus come. He said you couldn't even check the schedule online. He said if you got on the bus, the way you entertained yourself before the Walkman was invented was you looked at the condensation rolling down the window of the bus. He said, you had to rewind a videotape. You had to practice mindfulness to be kind and rewind or get charged for it at Blockbuster. And the acceleration of the world. Do you remember that? I mean, and you guys remember that? I mean, so wonderful. But
I remember getting charged. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you get charged. Exactly. It's like, and I remember the first time that somebody put a Domino's next to a Blockbuster, and I said, "That's genius." Oh my God.
All my dreams are coming true.
Exactly.
Perfect night. Put a perfect night.
Yeah, and so part of the idea of the great acceleration, which is what you kind of get at here, because what's happening in these personal stories of these different people, love affairs, finding your way towards a better financial future. So much of these stories is about the world begins to happen so fast for these people, they can't keep up with it, especially the later millennials, the ones who come towards the end of the game. There's a whole generation in Z that they don't get a chance to kind of contemplate the joys of childhood. I mean, that's the thing. You guys may be the last generation who know what it's like to have to sit there and occupy your time. And
you should have written this book. You wrote better than I did.
No, let me tell you something. My brother. This book was such an easy, joyful read. The stories are great. I recommend this book immensely for anybody who doesn't really understand this generation, written by somebody from that generation with some real wisdom. So absolutely terrific book. All right, Lindsay, I've done my bit doing this. You are in between, Lindsay. So can you kind of talk?
No, I want to hear him. I want to hear our guest talk about. But I think too that the thing, boomers like to say millennials killed everything from department stores to mayonnaise, whatever you want to say. I'd love to know what you say back to that, because it's like, are we just the quote unquote old folks just holding on to the things they want that aren't probably good for them, and millennials are like, hey, to your point, bridge builders, like, no, we're trying to make things better here. Is that what's happening?
Can I tell you, I thought I hated mayonnaise, and then I discovered later in life that I actually need it on French fries. Okay?
It's so good. It's so good.
Right. And I think that is the point I'm trying to make with that, is that at the end of the day, most people, whatever age they are, they kind of want the same thing. And in this book, the thing that I kind of saw with every single person, very different views, very different lives, very different places in the country, they wanted to form families. That was literally end of story, what happened. And it happens in different ways at different times. But I think that, like, at this time, when there's a lot of anger out there, when there's a lot of maybe misconceptions, when, two sentences on the internet that someone says make you think like 800 million things about them, that's actually not true. And I think the thing is that, like, people tend to want to have a nice place to go. Some of the stories in this book are about someone who made some big sacrifices to get a home, and that is what really matters. But at the end of the day, it was, you want to get a place to live, you want to have a way to move around, and you want people around you that you like. And that was kind of a cool story. And I think there was concern that millennials were killing that, right? That we were killing this idea of the home, of the family, etc. That's not what's panned out.
Wow. Can I pitch him real quick my millennial archetypes?
Yeah, please pitch me.
Okay. I can send them to you more in detail, but I have 5 here. I have the optimistic adapter.
Yeah.
I have the burnout achiever.
Oh boy.
I have the creative hustler.
Oh yeah, that's good.
The nostalgic bridge builder. And then
am I sounding like that?
I think so, and that's okay. That's good. Remembers life, but you remember life before smartphones and social media, and you feel like the last generation straddling both, etc. Yep. And then the resilient realist, scarred by disappointments, but pragmatic about moving forward.
Wait, we need to get someone to illustrate these people. We need like some cartoonist out there to like draw some pictures. I want to see. I can't draw to save my life, but we need that drawn.
That's a great. We'll find somebody. I'll forward these to
Yeah,
you, and
okay,
I'll
go
find a
ahead.
designer.
Love it.
But what I guess I'll say, but on that note, too, we've just got a couple minutes left here. When it comes to archetypes of millennials, and you break down, especially just with the 5 different people you talked to in the book, did you find between those 5, kind of break down the people you talked about quickly? Are there different categories? Are they really, by labeling you as a millennial, is it pigeonholed into one greater thing?
Yeah, no, I think there are these categories, and I think that's been something about millennials that actually stands out. If you look at, I'm a personal finance reporter. If you look at the wealth figures, there's greater inequality within our generation than the ones that came before. There's like $100,000 gap between the richest millennials and the poorest. So that's something that we could talk about that for a whole other hour. We'll have to do that in the future. But there are huge differences, right? Urban, rural. We were talking about this before. Urban, rural. If you got one of those lucky tech jobs or not, what have you. But, what I would say, and I think this is an important thing to remember, is because we grew up around the internet, because we're so used to social media, whatever archetype we fall into, like, we know, right? We know who we are, and we know what other people think we are, and we know what other people think they are. So I think that there is this kind of broader connection, despite being different. Like, we know. And I think sometimes people can assume, like, oh, that person from wherever they're from or doing whatever they're doing, like, they must not know what life is like for me. And it's like, oh, no. People know. And there's something, like, liberating in that, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Guys, we are talking with the great Charlie Wells. The book is Millennials, and he's in defense of his own generation. But
yes, I am.
Listen, he takes a wider angle. He's trying to see it outside as well. I will say you could get the book now wherever you find your books, over at Amazon or wherever else. It'll be posted on our page as well. Charlie, what are you working on next?
Yeah, look, I'm getting back to my job as a personal finance reporter, talking to people, calling them up. It is the best part of my job, calling people in the country. If I call you, if you're out there, please pick up. I want to hear what your financial life is like.
So you don't want my answer. Jim, maybe you have a better financial answer than me.
No. I would tell you, if Charlie calls you, you need to pick up the phone. You got to pick up the phone. You got to tell him what's going on. And by the way, he will write you in the best possible yet honest light and give a full sense of your humanity. What happened to millennials? You can find out by reading Charlie Wells' book.
I just want to say,
I was about to say, we have a resident millennial producing the show here, so let him give the final word.
Look, I kept my mouth shut the whole time. I have a few things to say, but all I have to say to you is, from fellow millennials to you, thank you for this book, brother.
You're welcome.
Keep on millennialing on.
I'm just not sure who these Gen X people in power are, by the way. All I see is boomers around me waiting for their grandchildren, the millennials, to take over. Thank you, Charlie. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. That was so fun. Thank you. Best one I've done.
Yay! Oh, yay!
Truly.
Come back soon. Tell your friends. Tell your
I would
friends.
love that as well. You guys are great.